suppliers are diverse, and we really need to provide our employees and our managers with the tools that they need to be able to interact with people who are different from them, not just from a gender perspective or ethnic difference perspective, but more importantly from a culture perspective. Now, during the time allotted, what I hope to share is what we did around this issue, why we did it, and what the impact it had in supporting our strategy for increasing cultural competence within our organization. Next slide, please. I think you went one too far. Is the operator on, or Jen?
Patricia, which slide should we be on, the agenda?
The agenda, because from where I'm sitting, there we go. Great, sorry about that. Okay. I want to talk about the business imperative that caused us to put this product in place, some of the key messages, and describe the diversity training that we implemented to achieve this goal. And 2 years ago, we wanted to upgrade our diversity training. It was not consistent. The distribution method was flawed. We had a lot of old learnings that focus on external attributes, specifically race, gender, and the like. And the technology was pretty old, and it wasn't interesting to use the tool. And the tool really didn't help managers learn. It more or less told our employees how to prevent a lawsuit, to be honest with you. And we asked the businesses, we said to our business heads and the human resources community, what do they want us to teach people? We got a list of about 20 items. We narrowed down the list to 5 areas of focus. The first one was to broaden the definition of diversity. The second one was to have an interactive course that uses current and more realistic vignettes to help our employees understand the strategic advantages of diversity and proactive inclusion. In other words, diversity is not just limited to what we would consider the protected classes in the United States of America. They then wanted us to teach our managers and our employees about multicultural teams and the notion that managers, although being sensitive to time zones, need to be more sensitive and aware of cultural norms. At Citi, it's not unusual for a manager in the United States to oversee a team of people globally. I myself have a team in Japan, London, and Hong Kong. And sometimes it can be very challenging to interact with people, clients, and suppliers from outside cultures of my own. The vignette that I'm going to share with you shortly attempts to highlight some of the dynamics of what not to do and to teach managers how they can be better managers. The fourth area that they wanted us to teach is called Generation Clash. And this deals with the notion that we have several generations in the workplace and that new hires are coming in with an excitement and an energy level, and they're working for someone that might be set in their ways and the dynamics that that can cause. And the last area that they wanted us to teach was this notion of where is my career going. The vignette focuses on a female is having a scheduled meeting with her boss to review her performance. She shows up for the meeting. He forgets that that's what the meeting was about and is not prepared. She's annoyed about his lack of respect, and it goes downhill from there. I want to remind you that the information and the sample vignette that I'll be reviewing specifically focuses on the multicultural teams part, and it was designed and developed for our employees in the United States. We have different models that we use overseas, but what I'm going to discuss today was from a United States perspective, and our team in Asia is actually working on using some of the basics that I'll be sharing with you this afternoon and customizing it for our employees in that region. Next slide, please. So here's the next slides are slides that are actually in an e-learning tool that we've developed around cultural norms. Before I proceed, I want to mention that all of the intelligence that I'll be sharing with you around cultural norms was done on behalf of a company that we work with by the name of ARMC Research. And one of the things that we show in the tool is this particular slide, and it reminds managers that cultures may differ more than we think, and cultural sensitivity is essential as we work globally with teammates and our clients. And what we try to do is make sure people understand that there's an important aspect of working in a proactive, inclusive environment, and there's a learning value to that, and there's a need to respect and appreciate different cultural styles and morality norms. For example, body movement and greetings vary in different cultures and relate different messages. In the United States, we greet each other with a hearty handshake, whereas in Japan, we bow. In the European companies with businesses in the United States, they often assume that the American employees have a European ancestry and therefore share similar culture. Conversely, in America, employees assume that business people from European companies will speak English fluently. And I'm sure many of you on the phone have experienced these situations. Next slide, please. The next few slides are going to be broken out by a region where we try to highlight, based upon the research from ARMC, some of the cultural differences or norms that occur in countries where we operate. If you kind of read some of these things, let me just point out some to you that I thought were interesting. In Russia, there's a value of direct communication. Changes must be made very carefully, and time is relative. If you look at our countries in Western Europe, time is also relative. But if you look at Britain, it's very open and direct communication, and changes must also be made carefully, as we described in Russia. In the Austria, Germany, and Switzerland countries, message context is usually clear, very direct. Let's get on with the business at hand, meeting management. Whereas in Britain, it's get to the point meeting management, and they follow protocol. And these are general concepts, but again, what we're trying to do through this tool with our managers is highlight some cultural differences or norms that they need to be aware of as they work with people and clients and suppliers around the world. Next slide, please. Another example is if you look at the Middle Eastern and African nations, if you look at, on the bottom left, Arab Middle East countries, very informal communication, similar to South Africa and Kenya. If you look at Nigeria, it appears slow to change. Africa overall, time is not money, time is relative. And for those of us in the United States, we would believe the opposite. We say time is money. In some of the Arab countries, it's rude to answer no to a request. If you look at other parts of South Africa, not traditionally to be punctual. So time is not an issue. Next slide, please. When we go to North and South America, on the bottom left, you see some of the cultural norms or differences between the United States and Latin America and Brazil. Very informal communication in the United States, change is valued, punctuality is valued, it's important to be on time, get to the point meeting management. If you look at our Latin America countries and Brazil, almost the opposite. Very formal, elaborate communication, change happens as it's needed, but it's not sought out. Punctuality and time are relative to the relationship. And meetings are meant to build relationships before we do business. Next slide, please. Again, Asia Pacific, same type of themes. The Pacific Rim, the context of the message is vague. That is, yes may not mean agreement. And you can see the other examples that we have here on the screen. Next slide, please. The next couple of slides basically takes the previous slides by country and by region and reformats it into, rather looking at things by country, also exploring general factors to consider as we work across different cultures. And here are some important factors that we highlighted. So instead of talking about the differences in the communication styles between one country and the next, we want to tell managers, when you think about communicating to people, communications can be direct or indirect. They need to understand that. And what we try to do is explain to them that the best practice is to structure your message carefully so you can be respectful and appreciative and kind, but still be clear about the action you expect. Another example is, if someone is a poor performer, that message should be given on a one-on-one basis, never in a group setting. And if they follow some of these guiding principles, if you will, and if they go to the previous slides and look at where some cultures may be indifferent to some of these things, as managers, they would have a better chance of getting things done. If you think about change versus tradition, we want to educate our managers to appreciate the fact that at Citi, right, the C stands for change. There's a lot of change and growth that goes on in our firm, but managers need to be sensitive. The U.S. managers need to be sensitive toward a culture's attitude toward change that will help them determine the amount of time and resources needed to implement change. Cultures that are more weary, and there are several that I referred to earlier, those employees need to feel that there's more of an investment. Their scrutiny will improve the project. Every objection from them can be seen as a project risk that can be mitigated. We want managers to understand that they need to embrace this scrutiny and respect these questions, and everybody will benefit. Next slide, please. Another series of factors that we want managers to consider. Again, what we've done is we've taken the countries, we've identified areas of focus, and we've identified formality or informality, relationships, and time. When you think about formality or informality, we are suggesting that our managers start formally and then become casual as they build the relationship. Take their cues from the culture and from the individual. In terms of relationships, a very good rule of thumb, always take a few minutes at the beginning of a meeting to introduce people and orient them to one another. When it comes down to time, it's important for you to always be on city time, as we call it, meaning that you're punctual and no matter where you are. However, it's also important to know if you're in a culture where time is treated more casually, understand that and don't assume that there is a power play happening if you're kept waiting. Look instead to see if a casual attitude toward time is a common pattern in that culture. And so this is kind of how we, in a very indifferent way, teach managers about the cultural norms. Next slide, please. And I want to share with you one of the examples that we use to do all the things that I just said earlier. We've created these vignettes. So I'm going to take you through a series of slides that highlight some of the pictorial views of an e-learning tool that we've developed called Multicultural Teams. So what would happen is this screen would shoot up on the screen. We would identify the characters that are in this vignette. They're introduced, and these characters in this example come from Latin America, Asia Pacific, EMEA, and North America. Next slide, please. Part one of the vignette would show that the team is waiting for another member to join. Without any introductions, they start the meeting by discussing the schedule. If you're looking at the screen, the person on the right-hand side with the tie on, that is Myron. He's the manager. Next slide, please. Then we take a break and we say to the person taking the course, they'll ask a series of questions about the team's interaction so far. In this example, as the leader of the team, Myron is responsible for chairing the meeting. How would we rate his performance? And then they go through a series of answers, and then the answer that we would like them to choose is to say that Myron's really thinking too much about his own time pressures and not enough about the requirements of chairing the meeting. Knowing that he has a diverse group. Don't forget the team members have traveled from around the world to attend the meeting. Angela and Shruti, who were two team members, made it clear that they would prefer to get to know each other before getting started. And Angela and Shruti are from Brazil and France. And if you recall what I said earlier, these cultures predominantly like to develop relationships before they do business. So far, Myron's sensitivity to cultural issues is pretty poor. Next slide, please. We then get to a second section of the vignette. The last team member arrives. The team continues to discuss the scheduling challenges, working around time zones and holidays, and in different countries. And then Myron, the team leader, is getting very frustrated about the fact that he has to deal with all of this. You're asked a question about the team's interactions. Scheduling for a geographically and culturally diverse group is not always straightforward. How do you think Myron should have dealt with this issue? Series of questions and answers. This is the answer that most people would choose. Although Myron is doing the right thing by at least listening to people schedule these issues, it would have been preferable if he had found out the dates and times that suited them before he put it on the schedule. And it's also important to consider the holidays associated with different religions and nationalities and so on and so forth. So far, Myron has not created a proactively inclusive atmosphere based on trust, respect, and empathy for his team. Next slide, please. Part three then goes to a lot more Q&A. Myron then announces they're going to go to a steakhouse and have some drinks, making both the vegetarian and the non-drinker on the team very uncomfortable. One team member puts her hand physically on another's arm because she's reacting to what he's saying, making him even more uncomfortable. And then Myron dismisses the work of one team member and leaves and puts Winston in charge. So then the person taking the course is asked, do you agree or disagree? There are a number of culture-related issues that were raised. What do you think happened? The answer would be, by leaving the meeting abruptly, without even apologizing, Myron may have caused offense, and his behavior may have suggested that he did not value or prioritize the work of his team. Mohammed seemed uncomfortable when Angela touched him, and you can kind of get the message from there. Next slide, please. The last part, the team continues without Myron because he storms out of the meeting. Winston is the interim lead. Winston's style is different than Myron's, very collaborative, consensus building. Myron is more direct and authoritarian. You're asked a question about the effectiveness of each style, and it's a true and false question. The question is, Winston's leadership style is more consensus-driven than Myron's. This might create a better atmosphere. What could have been done more effectively? And the answer is the statement is false. Consensus-driven meetings can be very productive as long as they are effectively chaired. So let's see how Myron's team feels after the meeting. So the meeting breaks up, and then what we show, next slide please, is we show what everybody on the team is thinking. Each person shares their thoughts. So, Shruti's upset. She wants to know why aren't we spending time to get to know one another. Myron's very upset because he believes that this team can't work as a team. The other woman says she should have mentioned that she's a vegetarian because now she's upset they're going to go for steaks and she can't eat. Winston says he's uncomfortable with the way a team member was criticized, but he didn't do anything about it. And, Myron was already annoyed, and this other gentleman was afraid to mention the fact that he's got some religious obligations in terms of holidays. You can see this might be an extreme example, but these things do happen. And what we tried to show through this vignette, which we found was very powerful, was the notion that when managers in our company went through this vignette as an example, they were able to feel that this was real to them. And they were able to, these examples resonated with them, and they felt that the tool that we provided to them with the vignettes that we shared, the examples of the cultural norms by country and then by function, if you will, were able to help them make a little more sense around why things were happening the way they were happening and how they can be more sensitive when they interact with our clients, our suppliers, and our employees. So that's what I wanted to show. Managers really, you just entered the slides, correct? Jen, are you there?
Yes, Pat.
Yeah, okay, my screen just went blank. I just wanted to make sure I didn't lose something, that's all. Sorry. Here we go. I think I just timed out, that's all. So what we attempted to show through this small example of a vignette, how we were able to use cultural norms in a way that was through an example of what managers currently experience in our company to kind of teach them something in a very subtle way. We received very good response from our managers when we shared these vignettes with them. And so we're quite excited. This program is about a year old. Our plan is on a yearly basis to upgrade them as necessary. And again, as I said earlier, our team in Asia plans on using several of these vignettes and customizing them to be more relevant, if you will, for our employees in Asia, but using the same type of training tool to educate our managers on cultural norms. At this time, I will be quite happy to take some of your questions. So, Vanessa, I believe you're the operator. If you would be so kind.
Yes, ma'am. At this time, I would like to instruct everyone. If you would like to ask a question, please press *1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster.
Patricia, we do have an online question that came through. And this one is, what, if any, were some of the issues in rolling out a product that highlighted cultural norms by country?
That's actually a very good question. I will tell you one instance in particular that we did have, because if you looked at the list of countries, what you're seeing here is a sanitized version. When we originally rolled out the software, some of the cultural norms that were identified by the research firm that we used from some of these countries were very extremely negative in the way they were being described. And so we had an employee from who was French who called up and said, I take offense to the French being described as, and I'm not going to give you the example, but safe to say that he was not happy with the way French were being described by this research. It was very direct and very negative stereotype. And so the good news is he thought that the product was great, but that he felt that we should have softened the language a bit. And so as a result of that employee, I'm a believer, if one employee calls you to complain about something or says something, there's probably 20 more that could have but didn't. So we worked with that employee and we said, let's figure out how we can agree on softening the language on how some of these countries are being displayed, because this product went out to north of 20,000 people. We didn't want to have any problems with our employees feeling as though we are sharing with them negative stereotypes as much as what we wanted to do was to share cultural norms to educate people who were not from those countries. So that was probably the most telling and most impactful response that we had received. That was could have been trouble if we didn't respond to it. So what you're seeing here in this product are the softened versions of the hard language that we originally rolled out in the product.
Here's a part two for that question. Were some of the employees in the organization from those countries offended in any way on how their culture was displayed?
They, I would say to you, I don't know if I would say they were offended, but I would say I have a very good rapport with a lot of the employees in our firm, and so when I made some calls, they didn't tell me that they disagreed with the attribute, but they didn't like to see it displayed on the screen, if you will. I think as adults, we're all adults on the phone, I think everybody would agree that every stereotype, every gender, every ethnic group, every part of the world is a good thing and a bad thing. And, everybody knows where you are on the spectrum of good things and bad things. And so I think they wouldn't disagree with the way these things were out there, but they were offended that it was being put on the screen. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
But I think by the mere fact that we reacted quickly, that employee who was pretty senior felt that we at least took his views into consideration, and now is one of our big advocates in getting more people to use the tool. So I say, that was a good close. Operator, do we have any more questions?
Yes, ma'am. Your first of 3 questions comes from the line of Kathy Campbell from Schwab.
Hi, I had a question about the actual vignettes, the video pieces that were produced.
Yes.
Did you do that in-house or was that through ARMC?
What ARMC helped us do is get the content right. We have, a corporate affairs department that has a studio that we used. We taped all of the vignettes in our buildings, but we used actors and actresses. What we didn't want to do is use real employees because our employees, I don't want to say come and go. That's not what I mean to say, and I hope that doesn't make the printed version of this call. But we did all the taping in-house because we do have a team of people in our corporate affairs department that actually shoots commercials and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
You're quite welcome. We also produced this vignette for people who are hearing impaired and seeing impaired. So we produced it in Braille, and we also produced it in large print and transcripts on the screen if they need that ability.
Your next question of 2 questions comes from the line of Lisa Gutierrez from Cummings Incorporated.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Lisa. Hi, Pat David here.
Pat, thank you so much. It's quite interesting. I have an organization and we're in 160 countries and have human beings in about 56 countries. So I was really intrigued with your learning here. All the content and that information was developed by Citi, or did you work with an external consultant as well?
The content in terms of the cultural norms, we got with the consultant firm called ARMC. The vignettes, meaning the example of what I shared in terms of the scenario of the manager, these employees, were examples of when we spoke to the managers and said, what do you want us to teach? And they said, we want you to teach multicultural teams. We said, well, what is it that you want us to teach? And they said, well, here's an example of what happens. So that's a real-life example, but we used actors and actresses, and we kind of made up their resumes. So the scenarios are fairly real.
Your real-life scenarios actually resonate.
Yeah, and that to me was impactful because I think sometimes, for those of you who are diversity practitioners, if you can come back, in the heyday 5-10 years ago and look at what we would call quote-unquote diversity training, it wasn't diversity training. Diversity now has such a broader definition, right? We want to create environments of how people can be more respectful of others who are different from them, and them is variable. And so we said the best way to do that is to, when a manager is sitting down and is going through these vignettes, he or she should feel as though that's real and they've seen that movie before. And that's what we were able to do. So we said, let's use real stuff instead of making it up.
So are those available for sharing, or are they?
I'm going to say yes, but you probably have to call me separately for me to do that.
You got it. Thank you.
You're quite welcome. We have another question.
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, press star 1 on your telephone keypad. Your final question comes from the line of Lisa Cohen from Fluor.
Hello, Lisa. Lisa, maybe she's on mute.
Ms. Cohen, your line is open.
Hello?
Hello,
Hello?
Lisa.
So sorry, I did have myself on mute. I'm curious about the software that you use to develop the interactive tool, and I'm also wondering if you used a collaborative method in your organization to have people review the content before it was released.
Yes, we did. We actually, anything from the legal department to our human resources generalists, we had some select managers who we felt were good to share this with. We also had some of our colleagues overseas look at this in our learning and development organization. So it wasn't just developed by, Pat David and her diversity team. We said, let's test this out for people who really don't know what our intentions are and get their feedback. So this thing maybe took 6 months in total for us to actually get to the point where we wanted to deploy it and deliver it.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of your other question, and I want to say it's Flashpoint video. We're not able to do, because of the technology differences, if we were able to, we could have actually shown you the e-learning live and had you all see the screens and hear the people speaking in the back and that whole scene. The whole e-learning tool that includes those 3 vignettes that I talked about in the beginning is about a 45-minute learning experience where they can stop and start it wherever they want. They don't have to take the whole series. But the bookends between the learning are the cultural norms, the back end is our diversity strategy, and resources for managers to go to if they wanted to become more knowledgeable about any of these issues. So that's kind of how we did it. But it's a pretty slick tool, I have to tell you. It's pretty fun to use. And if you'd like, certainly, you can get my information from our DVP colleagues, and I'd be happy to, give you a private showing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I think
at this time there are no further questions.
Thanks.
Pat, we do have another online question that came through. This one is from Kirsten McKesh, and she asks, is the target audience managers, and do you use this for team members working across cultures as well?
Yeah, the way we rolled out the software was it's all employees, but the way we rolled it out was rolled out top down. So the CEO is the talking head on the vignette, and we rolled it out to all managing directors, then vice presidents, then assistant vice presidents, then all non-exempt employees. And it took us about 5 days because we were able to roll out, 3,000 or 4,000 a day, but we rolled it out from top to bottom. So it's for all employees, not only for managers, because I would say to you, our regular employees who are not managing interact with people who are different than them. But we wanted to make sure that the managers got it first. The way we try to keep it alive is we try to ask managers when they're holding a town hall if they could maybe show a vignette, show one of these scenes and talk about it, and kind of make the actors have a life, if you will. And what was the second part of your question? You talked about with teams, I think? What was the second?
Do you use this for team members working across cultures as well?
Well, we actually, oddly enough, we are actually going to be rolling out in our division in the month of April a diversity leadership program for our minority high potentials. And we were just going through the design of the program just yesterday. And we had this nirvana, and we said, you know what, we should include this tool, this training, in all of our leadership development programs that we do for our high potential people. So the answer to that is going to be yes, effective April of this year.
Pat, also part 3 of this question is, you may have mentioned who you partnered with to develop this, but can you tell us again?
It's an organization called ARMC Research.
The final question is, can you give an approximate cost to develop?
It cost us more than 100, less than 250. How's that?
Great, and that was our final online question.
And that's in U.S. dollars, by the way. Well, I want to thank you all for listening, and I hope I was able to share something that could be used by our colleagues who participate in the Diversity Best Practices program. Thank you very much.
Patricia, this is Cynthia. I want to thank you personally for that wonderful presentation, and we definitely appreciate you sharing your expertise with us. At this time, we're going to move on to our second presenter for this web seminar. Our next presenter is Andres Tapia. Andres is Hewitt's Chief Diversity Officer and Emerging Workforce Solutions Leader, responsible for leading the company's internal and external diversity vision and strategies. Through his work with Hewitt and with dozens of its Fortune 500 multinational clients, as well as with public schools and law enforcement agencies, Andres is grounded in the cross-industry implications of achieving a diverse, high-performing workforce. Andres' innovative approach to foster an inclusive work environment includes shifting paradigms such as from tolerance and sensitivity to cross-cultural competence, and from programmatic to sustainable diversity. The insights and lessons are captured in his book, The Inclusion Paradox, The Obama Era and the Transformation of Global Diversity, and this book is to be published at the end of May this year. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Andres.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, Cynthia and Diversity Best Practices, for this invitation. You know, and listening to Pat, she's talking about scenarios. The one scenario that came to mind is I grew up in Lima, Peru, and where social distance between people is a lot less than it is among European Americans. And I didn't really realize that. So when I would go to a party, I found that I would, want to get closer to the person just to get into a comfortable social distance. And I didn't realize this, but they would inadvertently or subconsciously or even consciously take a step back, and I definitely subconsciously would take a step forward. And kind of like this dance would begin until I had walked them all the way across the room, and their back was against the wall, and they had nowhere to go. And so part of my walking through this cross-cultural competency very much emerges out of personal experiences, and really personal experiences about being clueless, really, and learning how to be clued into the fact that whether it's about managing time or managing social distance between two people, or the various different things that Pat talked about, as she talked about different countries, that these are very real and they impact day-to-day interactions in fundamental ways. So what I want to do is walk you through some thinking regarding building organizational cross-cultural competency. And the things I'm sharing with you are based on strategic work that I do at Hewitt as well as with our clients. And also we embed some of these concepts into a course that we have called The Power of Worldviews, Understanding Yourself and Others, and a cross-cultural learning partner program where we partner people who are culturally different from one another to learn through relationship. And then a managing cross-culturally where we work with managers on how to manage diverse and global teams. But rather than describing the programs to you, I want to describe some of the concepts behind them as a way of sharing with you. So if you can go to the next slide. Many of you may be familiar with Hewitt. Many of you are already our clients. But our specialty is indeed human resources. We're one of the premier human resources consulting and outsourcing firms in the world. And so you can see some facts about us on that slide. But if you go to the next one, in terms of globally, these are some of our locations. So our work, both internally and with our clients, really goes around the world. And some of the concepts I'm going to share with you indeed have worked, no matter what region of the world we're doing the work. So if you go to the next slide, if you think about Thomas Friedman's book, The World is Flat, I don't think it's flat, I think it's upside down. And meaning that if you think about so many of the rules about the U.S. dominance in a global environment, or Wall Street's dominance in the financial world, or really really, as we think about China and India and Brazil as emerging markets where a lot of money and jobs and opportunities are flowing their way, so many of the things that we've known to be the way the world works doesn't work anymore. And so if you go to the next slide, the question becomes, in a post-9/11, post-boomer, post-American, post-modern, post-economic boom world, how do we prepare our leaders for this upside-down world? In our studies of what is needed for sort of new leaders and new managers, if you go to the next slide, there's three competencies that we've identified, three skills that will be key for really surviving in this new type of world. One of them is learning agility. The other one is creative problem solving. And the third is cross-cultural competence, which will be the focus of the rest of my sharing with you. But just quickly on the other two, if everything is upside down and the rules are changing or the rules have thrown out the window, new ones are being developed, really the people that will thrive, not just survive, but thrive in this new world are those who have the agility to learn and no matter what their age is or their experience or their title, and willing to learn at every moment given the rapidly changing environment. And because we're facing issues that we've never seen before, they're one of a kind, they're unique. There's this whole issue of offshoring work to India and then India offshoring to the Philippines and back offices in Buenos Aires and decisions being made about global real estate in Dubai, that we're encountering very different ways of very new problems. And therefore, a key competence for leaders and managers is the ability to do creative problem solving, because we can't do problem solving anymore by going back to the best practices that were there even a few years ago, because they're not answering the new questions. But the third one is this issue about cross-cultural competence. And Pat did a great job of drilling down about how one of the ways in which at Citi where they're addressing that. And I want to add to that because cross-cultural competence is something that in this work is really essential, not only for diversity and inclusion, but just to be an effective leader, period. We need to be cross-culturally competent. So if we go to the next slide, who needs cross-cultural competence? Well, the gringos need it, but it's not just them. It's not just the Americans. The Argentinians have lack of cross-cultural competence about the Mexicans and vice versa. The French about the British and vice versa, and the Japanese about the Koreans. Latinos about African Americans, etc. So no one is immune. It's not just an American thing. Everywhere we do this work in the world, there is a lack of cross-cultural competence to manage whatever the difference may be, whether it be based on faith or gender or regional differences within country. Like in Brazil, there's issues between the Cariocas from Rio and the Paulistas from Sao Paulo and the Mineiros from Minas Gerais. And these are real, true diversity issues, but it's really embedded in cultural differences, and cross-cultural competency is really what's needed. And I would say that among us, too, as diversity practitioners, we are discovering that we have a ways to go ourselves. We might be very tuned into diversity issues wherever we may be working them, but as the world gets smaller, flatter, upside down, tilted, sideways, whatever way you look at the world, we're running into our own limitations as diversity practitioners and the need for us to be even more culturally competent in the work that we do. I think it's a challenge when we have very successful programs, let's say in the U.S., Canada, and now we're charged to do diversity and inclusion in other parts of the world, and the very programs that work so well here tend to backfire and have the opposite effect. So this is, as we say in Spanish, todo el mundo, the whole world really has to really grapple with the lack of cultural competence. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see a metaphor, an image that is pretty familiar in terms of the iceberg model. This one by Dr. Milton Bennett is a little bit deeper in that when we look at a culture, He talks about big C culture, which is the objective culture, it's visible cultures, the things that you can see. And usually when we see the iceberg model, we talk about race or ethnicity and gender and age, which is here. But here it's about anything that we can see about a culture, whether it's the architecture, the musical traditions, the government institutions. And then below the waterline is those things that are more hidden, like education, sexual orientation, things that, again, we're familiar with when we talk about the iceberg model. But there's also things like meaning of time, space, and life, death, and myths and legends, verbal and nonverbal communication. And this is really the space of cultural competence. I would say that the tip of the iceberg is not about cultural competence. That's more about maybe cultural knowledge. You know, what are the institutions in a particular country? What is their literature, their music? But cross-cultural competence is really about understanding the worldviews, the below the waterline perspectives of people from different countries, different regions, different races, ethnicities, different religions, etc. And so what do we mean by cross-cultural competency? So if you go to the next slide, this is the core of a definition that we use in the training that we have, and it's the following: the ability to discern and take into account one's own and others' worldviews, to be able to seize opportunities, make decisions, and resolve conflicts in ways that optimize cultural differences for better, longer-lasting, and more creative solutions. Now, let me break this down a little bit. If you look at the first part, the ability to discern and take into account one's own, and I'll stop that right there. You know, so much of cross-cultural competence is focused many times on what are others like, and what are others like is important. You know, what are the Russians or the Germans or the Peruvians? You know, what are they like? What is their worldview? But we tend to overlook our own. What is our worldview, whether we're African American or Hispanic American or gay in the city on the East Coast? You know, what has shaped our worldviews? And it could be anything. It could be the family, the religion, the personality that we have, or it could be the culture in which we grew up in specifically. And then the promise of diversity lies in ability to be, the promise of diversity about achieving innovation really lies in our ability to be culturally competent so that we can be aware of our own and others' worldviews, so then we can then address the conflicts that show up, seize opportunities, and then come up with long-lasting and creative solutions. So that's what real cross-cultural competence is about. And what is the path to cross-cultural competence? So if you look on the next slide, and I've already alluded to this, we see that being culturally competent has three major steps that are simple to describe but take a lifetime to master. And the first one, it's all about me, which is really understanding myself, ourselves, and how our worldview shapes our beliefs and behaviors. It's all about them, an understanding of the worldviews of others and what has shaped their beliefs and behaviors. And then the third part, which then gets us beyond just tolerating and being sensitive and understanding of each other, but really navigating to a mutually satisfying resolution, given that we're working for the same company, or maybe they're one of our customers or clients, and we have to move our understanding of how we're different and effectively navigate a solution. So for the rest of my few minutes here, I want to focus on the first one, which is all about me. How do I become more self-aware about my own worldviews? And go to the next slide. There is, in one more, go one more. A lot of cross-cultural study about what makes people culturally competent. Yes, training is important. Yes, reading books or articles is important. Going to workshops is important. But the most effective way that has been discovered by researchers to be more culturally competent, and this is a very simple answer, is to actually be in relationship with those from a different culture. To either be in another country over an extended period of time, or be in relationship with people who are culturally different in our personal lives or even, it's not enough to just run into them at work, but really enter into relationship with them. And so out of that come the stories, because it is in that discovery, of me, the reason how I found I was walking people across the room without knowing it? Not that their back was against the wall. I was kind of oblivious to that. I noticed because every time I would start by the hors d'oeuvre table, and every time I reached down to get something to eat, I would pick up something else. So obviously the table wasn't moving, I was moving, and moving to different food forms. And it was that kind of stories that then started to reveal for us that there's more to what is in front of us. So let me tell you a story here. Go to the next slide. And this one is when thank you is impolite. I was in India, and I was doing the Power World Views, and we were actually doing a train-to-trainer for some of our facilitators so they could do it. And by the way, we've had 11,000 people go through this training worldwide. This is a few years ago when we were rolling out in India. And so one of my colleagues, Indian colleague, after a really great day of training, took me out to dinner with a couple other associates, and we had a great dinner, and they shared all kinds of Indian food and Indian culture with me, and we had a great time, and it was on top of a great working day and everything. And then he walked me out so I can catch my cab to go back to my hotel. And as we were saying our goodbyes, I shook his hand and I said thank you. And suddenly all the warmth and connectedness of the day and of the evening kind of froze up, and he definitely pulled back, and like something had happened, like I had said something wrong, and I sensed something had gone amiss, but I couldn't really figure out what, and because we were sort of in this cross-cultural mode of learning, I asked him, I said, did something just happen? and he was trying to be polite. He said, no, it's fine. And I said, well, I'm going to take a risk here, and I'm going to lean into this because we spent the whole day talking about building bridges across cultures. And, think about it, because I feel like something kind of snapped here, and maybe tomorrow we can talk about it. So the next day, I saw my colleague, and he came running up to me and said, hey, Andres, I figured it out. And I said, yeah, what is it? He says, you said thank you. And I said, what do you mean? I said, thank you. He says, yeah, when you said thank you, that's the thing that sort of made me feel really uncomfortable. And I'm like, well, why? And he says, well, because in our culture, and this is not true for all the Indian subcultures, but the Indian subculture that he's a part of, to say thank you is actually implying that the person that did something for you did it out of obligation, that they had to do it because of their status in their relationship with you, or they're paid to do it. And so that really, to say thank you is to formalize something that was freely given in a way that was generous and out of a very personal place. And saying thank you in that context is actually formalizing it and putting a distance in the relationship. So, again, these are the kinds of things that one would not necessarily, if you think about a lot of the Indian training, Indian culture training you get, usually there's not things like that. There's stuff about the left hand and the right hand, and about caste systems, and or the Japanese culture, there's about how to present the business card, two hands and all that. But it's only when you're in the moment that these more deeper, below the waterline, improbable things come up that we learn, and that's the power of being culturally competent, is by being immersed. So if you go to the next slide, when we enter into a relationship and we're working across cultures, suddenly things that just seem given, like what is space, like the space between me and another person when I'm talking to them, or what is a no, or what is time, or what is trust, or what is within our control, or what is fair. All these, if you look at them, chances are, if we were not talking about cultural competence and I just said, what are these things, chances are we would just start answering them as if there was just one answer to them. But across cultures, we find that all these things come and clash with each other. I'm just thinking about the issue of time, again, as a Latin American who came up to college in the U.S., I remember having lunch with a newfound friend and a European-American friend, and we'd be having this intimate conversation about what we're going to do with our careers and our lives and how we're going to change the world. And suddenly, my friend would look at his watch and say, "My gosh, Andres, it's 12 o'clock. I have to go. Here's my hat for the lunch," and away they went. And they left me hurt, offended, and bewildered. That how dare he leave in the middle of the conversation just because the clock said it was 12 o'clock. Now, later that day, I would be going to another European-American friend's dorm, and I'd show up just to hang out. They open the door, and they're clearly upset. And they say, "Andres, what's the matter with you?" And I said, "What do you mean?" "It is 7:30. I said, "Yeah, I'm here. We're going to hang out." "We were supposed to get together at 6 o'clock. You're an hour and a half late." And so he was also bewildered, hurt, and offended around this issue about time. And clearly we were managing and interpreting time in very different ways. And through some cultural studies and also comparing notes with other Latin Americans in the college, we discovered that we did have different interpretations of time, that European Americans interpret time in an objective, scientific, clock-oriented way, right? That there's 60 seconds to the minute and 60 minutes to the hour. But Latin Americans, in many ways, we interpret time not from a clock orientation, but from an event orientation. That things begin and end when they're supposed to. You just feel it when the fullness of time has come. And just to illustrate that, once I understood this clock orientation, I understood this artifact in American culture called the party invitation. So this artifact, right? It's a cultural artifact. Has a start time. And I'm like, well, okay, start time is good. This is the time you start getting ready. You kind of have to have a sense of when to start doing that. But what do you mean an end time? How do you know when the party is going to be over? If the food is good and the company is good and the dancing is good, the party goes on all night. Otherwise, the party is over and you go to somebody else's house. And so something as innocent as time can have two completely different interpretations. And so if you go to the next slide, there's two Europeans, and you may have heard their names. You may be familiar with their model, but I'm going to introduce it for those who are not, by the name of Hans Trompenaars and Charles Hampton Turner. And they were fascinated with the fact that a big company, big multinationals, like, for example, IBM, could have a very strong corporate culture. They could have a common, industry that they're in, and attract people from all kinds, similar types of backgrounds educationally. And yet, when they came together from different countries, they clashed. They had cultural barriers. They did not have inclusion as they should. And so they developed a survey where they had all kinds of scenarios. And in the scenario is like, what would you do in this situation? And I'll just give you one of the many that they have. And in this one, the scenario is the following. You're in the car, your friend is driving, your friend is speeding, and you know your friend is speeding. And suddenly the flashing lights of police cars show up in the rearview mirror, you get pulled over, and the police officer comes to you and asks you, not your friend, but you, was your friend speeding? What would you answer? And so when they cut the data, they found that there was national cultural differences in the answers. The 97% of people from Switzerland would say, yes, officer, my friend was speeding. But only 36% of Venezuelans, neighbors to my native Peru, would give the same answer. So what's going on here, right? I mean, it's the same scenario, two completely different interpretations of what to do. And Trompenaars and Hampton Turner, called this the difference between a universalist culture and a particularist culture. And this is two different ways of interpreting what is fair. A universalist culture interprets fair by saying one rule applies to everybody equally, no exceptions. And a particularist culture says, there's so many different variables in a particular situation that what is fair is you take into account the particulars, such as it's my friend, in order to determine what to do. And so now you can see where the judgments emerge, right? I mean, one of the things that happens when people behave in a way opposite from how our moms or mamas taught us how to behave. When they act in an opposite way, we can only assume, if we're not culturally competent, we can only assume one of two things about them. They're either incompetent or bad people, because why else would they behave that way? And so you can see when worldviews come in clashing in the workplace, that the judgments fly, right? You can imagine the universalist saying to the particularist, how dare you lie to the police officer? And you can imagine the Venezuelan saying to the Swiss, how dare you betray a friend? So these are heavy judgments. And if you go back to the time example I gave you, I judged my European American colleagues when I was not culturally competent here, as cold, indifferent, don't care about others. All they care is about doing things, and they don't care about people. Very judgmental. And how did they judge me and other Latins? Undisciplined, can't get it together, disorganized. And so this is kind of what happens when we see different behaviors that are opposite from what we believe is the right way to do things, even though we're all wanting the same things like trust and relationship and friendship. So a couple quick examples, and then I'll open up to questions. Even our language is very powerful. Even our language is very powerful, and that is that it's reflective of worldview. So if you go to the next slide, it is, I would argue there's no coincidence that English, and so European American culture, which is more individualistic when it comes to a sense of identity, English is the only language in the world where first person singular is capital. It's the only capital pronoun in English, and it's the only capital pronoun in any language is the one in English. And then if you go to the next slide, it's no coincidence, I would argue, that Spanish, which is coming from a Latino culture, a much more communal culture, which much more communal language, such as nosotros, us, la familia, the family, el equipo, the team. Clearly, these words exist in English, but it's how our language is peppered. When I get on the plane at O'Hare, I'm surrounded by I language. When I land at Jorge Chávez Airport in Lima, I'm surrounded by we language about what we're going to do. And a couple other final examples in terms of the power of language. Go to the next slide. Cultures that have a strong sense of internal control, like European American culture and Northern European culture in Europe, pull yourself by your bootstraps, tame the Wild West, God helps those who help themselves. These are very American phrases, but very, very much indicative of internal control. Now, contrast this with Latino culture, which is more external control, more fatalistic, rooted in Latino Catholic fatalism. And go to the next slide. And our language is God willing, Dios quiere, que será, será, what will be, will be. And then if I show up late to the airplane and I miss the plane, in Spanish, I do not say the equivalent of I missed the plane. I say the plane left us. No sé qué pasó, pero ahí se fue. I don't know what happened, but there it went. So this is very powerful because this is where cultural differences come into play in the workplace. This is the clashes that happen. Here's where the judgments happen. So finally, to wrap up here, if you go to the next slide, this is a quick visual of the Trompenaars model. There's 7 ways in which cultures can be different. I've given you an illustration of a few. You can look them up. And then the last example I'll give you is, next slide, what is the definition of a bribe? And when I do this with groups, we talk about it, and eventually the definition of a bribe is, giving someone money in exchange for something that you want, right? And so to circumvent sort of the, kind of where things would go otherwise. So with that definition, let's look at another word. So you go to the next slide. What is the definition of lobbying? And suddenly, what seemed so blatantly negative, like a bribe and a description of it, if you use that same definition, you have to really think, well, what is the definition of lobbying? And what could say that is, exchange of something that you want, in exchange of money, it just happens in a different kind of way. So not that I'm saying lobbying is corrupt. What I'm saying is that many times it's easy to judge what happens in other countries and give it a very judgmental label, and yet there's a challenge here because of the need to be cultural competent to really be understand. Is it bad? Is it poor performance? Is it criminal or corrupt? Or is it a legitimate different way of looking at the same thing? So with that, very open to answering any questions or hear any comments.
At this time, I would like to remind everyone, if you would like to ask a question, press star 1 on your telephone keypad. We will pause for just a moment to compile the Q&A roster. Your first of 2 questions comes from the line of Roberto Ramos from Moffitt Cancer Center. Mr. Ramos, your line is open.
Thank you. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I just have a question regarding the concept of values. In terms of cultural linguistic competence, when applied in healthcare services, I think it's very different in some aspects when applied in the business arena. But what do you see could be some of the fundamental values that would be consistent in a business model as opposed to a helping profession model, which is where cultural competence was based?
Yeah, there's a lot to your question, and I want to make sure I answer it, so let me take a stab at it. First of all, I would say that we can walk around, whether in the business environment or the healthcare environment, espousing the same values, such as integrity, work ethic, quality, productivity. And yet, when it plays out, when different players from different cultures are interacting with each other, we may have actually different interpretations of the same value. So to answer your question, about what values may we have in common in a corporation, well, we have to talk about the values, but we also have to talk about the interpretation. And I think people walking around with same values and different interpretation many times, and also they're walking around with different values. So to really engage it in a practical way, we would have to look at the context in which we're talking about, and if there's sort of a clash and a misunderstanding, I often sort of unpacking it that way. Now, do corporations or healthcare organizations need corporate values to help them navigate together as a community? Absolutely. But I think there needs to be an inclusive, cross-culturally competent conversation about what these values mean for us, and are we taking into account the fact that people from different parts of the organization have different interpretations of those exact same values. And I'm open to a follow-up question just simply because I'm not sure if I would have hit it just right.
Your next question comes from the line of Lisa Cohen from Fluor.
Hi there.
Ms. Cohen, your line is open.
Hi, Andreas. Thank you so much for this.
Mm-hmm.
It's been very interesting. I'm just wondering, I noticed that you studied history, and it's curious to me that while it seems to us, or at least it did to me initially, that this time period is somehow different, that globalization is different. Globalization's really been prevalent for a long, long time, actually. And I'm wondering how, as a historian, you might see the difference between this time and how we are addressing issues versus, say, the time of the Renaissance and the time of discovery, where they had obvious, very large obstacles for diversity to address.
Yeah, wonderful. So it looks like you and I need to, at some conference, meet up and have some coffee and go, talk about this more, because that's a wonderful, big question. But let me just answer it in this way. You're totally right. Globalization, has always been around. It just has manifested itself differently. And I think the major difference of today's globalization versus, pick your era, is the instantaneousness of it. Is that right now, in the moment, it could be whatever number is on the phone, and we could all easily be in the U.S. or we could be around the world, and we'd be having this exact same conversation, watching the exact same slides in the moment, and so that is one aspect of it. It's instantaneous. The other aspect of it that is different is that kind of things moved from one. You went on the merchant ship across the ocean to another place, and then you were in that place, and so there were many places, and they were sort of fixed. And now place is sort of totally deconstructed. What is place? If my colleague is in India and another colleague is in Argentina, we're actually able to work together on the exact same document, on the exact same project. And in fact, certain jobs can move from one country to another. And it's not just to serve that country. See, this is different, right? It's not that job to serve, internationalization of multinationals was you go and you plant your flag in Brazil, and then you serve the Brazilian market. Now you plant your flag in Brazil, so from there you can serve your market in Manila. So those are some dimensions of it that I think make it different. And I'll just add one third one, and I'll just throw the millennials in there. I think that the millennials are the first true global cohort. Because of this instant globalization that we have, a lot of their experiences with the economy and with politics and with terrorism are common, and so a lot of things that are shaping their worldview are similar regardless of the country that they've grown up with, and that also is very it's a differentiator from previous eras of globalization.
Great, thank you.
Again, if you would like to ask a question, press star 1 on your telephone keypad. There are no further questions at this time.
Okay.
My apologies. There is a question from the line of Nancy Costigan from Harvard University.
Hi, this has been fabulous. Thank you. And I don't know if this is a question so much as an invitation for a follow-up, because it seems to me that the next step in this kind of training or awareness building is something around how one opens up the conversation about cultural differences with people of different cultures. So how you sound like you live in a world where there's a lot of feedback being given. You're both good at soliciting it, and the people that you're working with are good at giving it. But how do you say to somebody from Japan as opposed to somebody from Argentina, gee, something just felt off to me, and what was that, and how can we talk about that? And that seems to be that there might be some very significant cultural differences around how one initiates that conversation.
Oh, yes. So I think the answer varies depending on the context, meaning if we're talking about within an organization, I'm a very big believer in building organizational-wide cross-cultural competency, that in order to move the work of diversity and inclusion forward, I've been making the case here that among many things, but one of them is we've got to be culturally competent. But we can't do it sort of as independent folks. We need to do it as an organization, and everybody kind of has to get that they not only have to have the diversity and inclusion vision and philosophy, but understand that the strategy, one of the strategies, is we have to be culturally competent, and this is what it looks like, and we have to engage each other in a way to talk about it, or else it's not going to work. The reason I call my book The Inclusion Paradox is that I believe that the paradox for inclusion is that rather than focusing on what we have in common, which is sort of the melting pot concept, or finding our common humanity, which is helpful, okay, but many times we get stuck there, and a lot of traditional diversity training has trapped us in our inability to talk about our difference because we're not supposed to kind of point it out. And I believe that the paradox is that in order to have true inclusion, we have to learn how to constructively call out our differences. And I gave some examples of doing that. And within an organization, there's ways of laying the groundwork in order to create a culture and environment where that can be done. Now, if the context is, I'm in Japan and I'm just meeting, somebody for the first time, and we don't have the shared organizational experience and journey, then I have to be careful to not jump to conclusions and engage them in a very direct communication about something being off. And so it's a different approach. However, I still believe that being culturally competent gives us tools to more effectively address those forms of communication. It just probably takes longer because we don't have that common background that one would in an organization that's tackling this as a community.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
There are no further questions at this time.
Andres, this is Cynthia. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your time and knowledge with us today. We definitely look forward to your book coming out in May, The Inclusion Paradox. And as we wrap up, I'd like to give a huge thanks to both of our powerful speakers today, Patricia David from Citi and Andres Tapia from Hewitt Associates. I would also like to thank all of you on the call for your time, participation, and thoughtful questions. Collectively, I feel like that you've all helped to make this web seminar a tremendous success. And for your information, the recording of this presentation will be posted online at diversitybestpractices.com, and it will be in the members only section. Again, thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our upcoming best practices sessions in San Jose, California and Cincinnati, Ohio. Thank you all again.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
This concludes today's presentation. As a reminder, your browser will now be redirected to a survey. Please take a moment to complete it. We do appreciate your feedback. Again, thank you for attending today's web conference. Have a pleasant day.